And we are back on the Zero Hour. Joining us now is our good friend of the program, good friend of all the values we like in this world. Terry O'Neill is president of the National Organization for Women. She is an attorney. She is an advocate, and she's also president of the Now Foundation and I believe chair of the Now Political Action Committees. So, Terry, thanks for joining us as always.
Richard, it's great to talk with you again.
Likewise. And listen, I wanted to ask you about a couple things. It's been, it's been the Week in Women. If we had a feature called the Week in Women, it would be quite a week. Particularly because, among other things, you were part of the press conference yesterday announcing new polling data on caregiver credits in Social Security, which is an idea I'm excited about. So tell us about that, if you would.
It is a great idea. It's an idea I think whose time has come, and it is really exciting. You know, there's about close to a dozen bills pending in the U.S. Congress between the House and the Senate right now, with ideas for expanding Social Security benefits. And there's a lot of ideas of how to expand, and frankly, Now is very much in favor of all of them. But one of the ideas that we are especially excited about is the idea of expanding benefits through caregiver credits. Here's how it works. So women work a lifetime at unequal pay, and over their lifetime, they lose between $400,000 and $2 million in because of the gender wage gap. Some, but not all, but some of that gender wage gap is related to the fact that women are forced to either go part-time or drop out of the paid labor force altogether to care for children or ill family members or elderly family members. They're caregiving. It's a lot of work. They don't get paid for it. Social Security benefits are based on your wages, right? So women, get all the way to their retirement age, and Social Security, when calculating the benefit, it's going to look back at your 35 years worth of wage earnings. But the average woman is in the paid labor force only 28 years. So the caregiver credit, and so you can see that artificially pushes down her Social Security benefit in her retirement years, just at the moment when she really needs retirement security because she doesn't have much in the way of savings because on average women are getting just 77 cents to the dollar. So they work a lifetime at unequal pay, and then their Social Security benefit is lower than it should be because they had to drop out of the workforce to provide care. Okay, so the way the caregiver credit works is it makes an adjustment in that Social Security benefit to account for the years that women drop out to provide caregiver services. There's different ways of doing it. Nita Lowey has a way, Gwen Moore has another way, but the important thing is that we are now recognizing that women should not pay a price in their Social Security benefit for having dropped out of the paid labor force to give hard work to family members without pay.
Well, absolutely, and I do think it's a terrific idea as well. And one of the things that gets me about this debate is you'll talk to a conservative politician who will say, "Well, nobody worked harder than my dear mama," and that's real hard work too. But when you say, "Great, let's provide Social Security benefits for us," now hold on. It points out the fact that if we really do value caregiver work in this country, we should recognize that in the way we provide income security to people. Don't you think?
Exactly. Oh, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the main thing. If you value it, let's put a value on it and really, literally put our money where our mouth is.
Now, one of the problems we face, and we've got so much to talk about, Terry, but one of the problems we face on this issue is that um, as you start to think about how to calculate it, the problem is, frankly, every calculation process runs the risk of not being fair to women, but at least it's a start. For example, if you take the earnings they had while they were working, if you took those 28 years and just took that average instead of the 35, you'd offset for the time they were spent out of the workforce, but you wouldn't offset for 70 cents, 77 cents on the dollar. You wouldn't offset for the fact that they may have had far fewer opportunities because of the sexism that says, well, you'll probably take time off anyway, so the glass ceiling effect and so on. But at least it's a start, right?
Absolutely, it is a start. And in fact, one of the proposals is simply to look at median wages across the board in the U.S. And sort of plug in a number that is some portion of the median wage. That's made. So if a woman drops out of the workforce, say in 2014, then when Social Security goes to calculate her benefit, instead of $0 earned that year, she will be deemed to have earned, maybe whatever the median wage was in 2014, or some portion of the median wage in 2014. So yeah, and that's a good idea because it takes median wages for men and women, and that way women are not being penalized in Social Security for the fact that you have that 77 cents on the dollar. And it's really important for women of color, and here's why. African American women, for them, the wage gap is right around 64 cents to the dollar, and for Latinas, it's like 59 cents to the dollar. A big reason for that, and this affects white women too, is that women generally cluster in lower paid occupations, so retail, service, anything that ends with care, health care, child care, elder care, those tend to pay less, and they have less in the way of pensions or 401ks. They often don't have that at all. They have either more meager or zero health benefits. The Affordable Care Act is making a big difference in that. But the reality is that right now, underpaid women are not only underpaid, but they are over taxed in the sense that they have to pay their own health care. They have to pay their kids' own health care.
Right.
And at the end of your working career, you've been making 59 cents on the dollar, 64 cents on the dollar. How are you going to save for your retirement? Well, you can't. So women of color are deeply reliant on Social Security benefits, and we can't allow Social Security to continue to penalize them for the lower wages that they were making during their lifetime.
Well, we're talking with Terry O'Neill, president of the National Organization for Women. And while you were talking, I had an idea, and my idea is this: it's radical. I'm not even sure I support it, but it's interesting because I don't want to cut Social Security benefits for anyone. But wouldn't it be? I want to expand them across the board, and especially for women who have been cheated in our economic system. But if you said, okay, women make 70 cents on the dollar, therefore their benefits will be round. That's 23 cents. If their benefits would be rounded up by half of that, let's say 11 cents, and therefore using the averaging process, and therefore men's benefits would be averaged down by 11 cents, suddenly we'd have a society that is universally in support of equal wages for women, because men would be paying a financial price for the first time in history for the economic discrimination that's shown to women in the workforce.
Richard, I've never heard that, and actually, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good place to start. We could seriously look at that, and honestly, here's why that is. It is a very good idea. The reality is that whether it's wages or whether it's Social Security benefits, which are really just wage replacement, right, that you get after you're no longer working, that's money that goes into households by and large. That is money that is available for whole families. So to equalize it it's not necessarily a men against women thing, right? Because it's still going to be going with the family. And in fact, the studies are pretty clear that wages that go to women very disproportionately go to the welfare of the family members, much more than wages that go to men, right? The women are not buying cars or Maseratis, or really cool stereo equipment. They're buying food, they're buying health care, they're buying sort of staples that the whole family shares. So any money that goes to women actually lifts up whole families. And I think and it's good for men. And here's how you can tell that it really is good for men. The polling is showing that men are very interested in closing that gender wage gap. Why? Because their own salaries, their own wages have been pushed down by anti-union measures over the past few decades. They're seeing their own wages go down, and they're looking at their wives and saying, "Oh my God, you're getting an unfairly low wage. My wage has been pushed down by anti-unionism. If you were just getting paid fairly under the law, the whole family would be benefiting from better wages for women." And men get that, and the polling is showing that they're very interested in closing that gap.
Well, first of all, the reason why you never heard that other idea is that I just made it up while we were talking, and I gotta be careful sometimes about that. But the second is that the second idea that occurred to me as you were talking was, you're absolutely right. I've seen those figures that show that women's expenditures go to basically household staples, and it also struck me. I wonder if there isn't. We're all talking about how to create a stimulus effect for the economy. I wonder if wage increases for women. It'd be interesting to get an economist to look at this. Wage increases for women don't have a higher stimulus effect than wage increases for men because they're more immediately spent as opposed to like banked for, savings or whatever. And they're spent on things that are job creating, like food production and childcare and other essential things. Whereas, the occasional purchase of a Maserati doesn't have that much of a stimulus effect. So it'd be interesting to see if it wouldn't be better for the economy if we're looking at ways to increase wages, if it might not be best for the economy to concentrate on women's wages for a while.
That I think that's absolutely true, Richard. I think that's a great idea, and it's a really good reason to focus on improving women's wages. And I think we should also think about something else. One of the questions you have with, for example, enhancing Social Security benefits through the caregiver credit. There's no question it's expensive. It's the Social Security system will be paying more out in benefits because, after all, women are nearly half the workforce anymore. So can we afford it? Well, the answer is absolutely we can afford it. One of the things we obviously have to do is scrap the cap, and I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with that, right? So
Yep.
right now, most people are paying 6% in Social Security taxes, but the wealthiest are paying way less than 6% because of that cap. So you get rid of it, so everybody is paying the same flat tax into the Social Security system. That's one thing. But the other thing that you need to do in order to really strengthen Social Security is broaden the jobs base, right? Because what employed people do is they pay into the Social Security system. So we need more
Absolutely.
jobs. And then we need, as you're talking about, we need better wages for especially middle income, lower income, and middle income Americans. The better wages they get, more money flows into the Social Security system. So there's
Well,
no need to even increase the
we
taxes if you do that.
we we will continue this conversation. I have to go to a break right now, but we will continue this conversation after the break with Terry O'Neill, president of the National Organization for Women. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour talking with Terry O'Neill, president of the National Organization for Women. We've been talking about Social Security and the caregiver credit. And, I also like this idea. I guess I'll just close out with this, offer you a final thought before we go to some other interesting topics out there. But I like this idea of giving women, or really anybody who is a caregiver, credit for their time spent out of the workforce, because I think it says something good about us as a society if we're able to do it. Well, first of all, as you guys noted in your press conference this week, the idea is extremely popular with the public for very good reasons. And but number two, I think it says something good about us if our political system can translate that popularity into policy, because it says that we're still capable of evolving and growing, including in our understanding of what the economy is and what it means to be a contributing member of society. And I just think it would be nice to see that happen.
Yeah, Richard, I could not agree with you more. I mean, that's exactly right, and I think you're right. It's got to be for all caregivers, men as well as women, and increasing numbers of men. It's still very much a minority, but increasing numbers of men are moving into that role.
And I'll tell you a quick story. When my son was born, I was working in a very sexist business, which is most of them. And I'm telling this quick anecdote by way of transition. And the labor was very long. It went 36 hours, but there was supposedly an important meeting the next day. So after having been up all night, I showed up an hour late to the meeting the next morning and was promptly greeted by the CEO saying that nice that Mr. Mom decided to join us.
Whoa.
Um, this was for being an hour late after a 20-hour labor. That to them was a shocking display of caregiver leave that I was an hour late to the meeting because my son had been born. So that's what we're up against. And I'm going to transition that to the conversation about women in tech because we had the fascinating if it weren't such a serious topic, one is tempted to laugh at the idea of the CEO of Microsoft, which is a story I know you told. A panel of, first of all, a get together, a conference on women in tech, because Silicon Valley is a very, as we know, sexist place, home of the term brogrammer instead of programmer. Um, Horrifically sexist place, obnoxious place, really, in that sense. And here you have a conference on women in tech with an all-male panel. I think that's pretty much the textbook definition of mansplaining to begin with. And then you have the CEO of Microsoft when they're asked what can women do to get equality of better wages, says, well, basically, maybe you know the exact quote, but says basically count on karma. Um, I believe he used the word karma, to which I guess my question would be for the women in tech, how's that working out for you so far? Um, so you read about that quote. What are your thoughts? And did I get it right?
Oh, yeah, you got it exactly right. Seriously, rely on karma. And I think he actually said something like, don't even ask for that raise.
Right.
Basically his message was, don't lean in, little ladies. Kind of sit back and let the system work for you. And like you said, how's that working so far? Not so well. And, the thing that's so sad about it is that Microsoft reportedly has a program for helping women succeed within Microsoft. And honestly, the CEO has just seriously undermined the credibility of that program. And I have to tell you, there so many corporations put their so-called social responsibility programs into their PR departments,
Hmm.
and that tells you exactly how serious they are about social responsibility, which is not at all. But one could have high hopes for Microsoft. I don't know that their program for women is a sham, but certainly it is a terrible thing for the CEO to be claiming that there is no problem when that problem is just staring him in the face.
Well, there were a couple interesting things about it. First of all, I have to say, I think he knew right away that he blew it because he started to try to walk it back. And I will say that I think one or two of the other answers were maybe halfway decent. I'd have to go back and look. But in terms of Microsoft, yeah, I think you're exactly right, Terry. I mean, I think that's right on to say that you see all these brochure, you see it in the annual report every year and all this bragging on the website about all the great things they do. But again, it struck me that two things. One is the culture of the billionaire executive nowadays is one where they really do believe that it's a matter of karma. And including, I guess, if you're born a woman, maybe that's your karma too. Um, and number two, it struck me once again. You and I have talked about this a million times, I think, from the time we first met, that the psychology of sexism and the psychology of economic injustice are inseparably entwined. And this is almost the crystallization of it. That yeah, karma will get you the pay you deserve, almost as if the next sentence is just like it got me the pay I deserve. And
Right.
that's why, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think that's exactly what he was getting at. Is it works for the guys, surely it will work for the women too. And that's exactly the problem. Is that, and it doesn't. The other terrible part of that attitude is that because karma will work for you just fine, if you're not succeeding, it is something about you that is a problem. and there is nothing systemic. I think the worst thing that has happened to this country is that we bought hook, line, and sinker this whole notion that rugged individualism explains everything, that there is no system, there is no systemic problem. It's honestly, just to draw an analogy, that's the reason why only a minority of white people, and I proudly am part of that minority, understands that what happened in Ferguson, Missouri was about race. But white people don't want to admit it. They don't want to acknowledge it. They want everything to be an individual problem. It was the individual police officer. It was the individual kid on the street who maybe was, rude to the police officer. They don't want to admit that there is an institutional or systemic racism problem in that incident or in this country. It's the same thing with sexism. We don't want to admit, and we are not accustomed to thinking about the systemic forces that result in unfair outcomes between men and women. And I think that the CEO of Microsoft was just buying into that whole rugged individualist myth.
Right. And I think that, karmically speaking, he's had to pay a certain price in public relations, and he has, of course, issued an apology since then. I'm sure their public relations crisis management team was in effect before that panel was even over. But again, and I think this is an important thing to keep coming back to, whether it's caregiver credits or anything else that can be an instructive moment for people. It's like the old saying that goldfish don't know what water is, right? Because they're floating in it. They just think that's what the world is.
Right.
They're not aware that they're in a goldfish bowl. They just think the world is something you float in. Racism, sexism, bias, bigotry, these are all things that are so baked into certain people's perspectives that they're hard to shake. And I think it's very hard to begin a conversation, for example. And I wasn't planning to talk about this, but it's an interesting topic, so I'll just mention it. It's very hard to say look, I've had to face moments where I've realized I had a biased reaction to something. I'm the product of my culture. It's very hard sometimes to say to a guy like the CEO of Microsoft, that was kind of sexist, to find that language that says that can actually maybe open somebody's eyes as opposed to just making them defend. It's always, whenever you say that to people, people rightfully say, well, I don't want to have to ask permission to point out bigotry. And that's exactly right. But, how do you find the right tone? Or do you think it's irrelevant? You just say what you got to say. And if people get upset, they get upset.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do just say what has to be said, even though people don't particularly like it. I mean, my role is very often to speak truth to power. I will say this. My first reaction publicly to hearing what the CEO said I was very outraged. But then I honestly, I also want to say this about Microsoft. There's a couple of good things that they're doing. First of all, at least from a couple of years ago, on the stats that I've looked at, Microsoft's CEO to ordinary worker pay ratio is one of the lowest in the country. Now, they're at 30. That's actually a very high number. But on average, corporate CEOs are paid 300 times their ordinary worker pay, or their typical worker pay. So Microsoft is doing something very right. Along those lines. The other piece is that Microsoft has a board of directors of 12 individuals, of whom 3 are women. So that's actually well above the tech industry norms. Your Facebook's got no women. Twitter, I don't know what they are, but they're not good. There's just a number of those very high-performing public well-known tech companies don't have hardly any women in the executive suite, and Microsoft is doing better than they are. So on the one hand, and I have to say, yes, to the credit of the communications team over at Microsoft and to the credit of the CEO himself, he did issue an apology very quickly. So, context definitely matters. But on the other hand, his apology was needed, and it's a good thing he apologized because he said something that deserved an apology.
Now, I'm going to do something terrible here to offset that good ratio a little bit. It is great that the ratio is not as large as it is for most CEO to average workforce. But on the other hand, they have one of the highest male to female ratios around. I just Googled it while we were talking. Microsoft is 76% male, the Microsoft workforce, which means they get paid more because which reduces the CEO to average worker ratio. So I could be a little bit of a wise guy here and say, well, yeah, sure, if you got mostly men, you got a higher paid workforce. But yes, no, I hear what you're saying, though. They're doing good things and in that sense, and they should be commended for it. In fact, I'm quite surprised actually that the difference is that low, and I wonder if that includes stock options and so on.
Well, yeah, it
But
has actually. Yeah, it has to do with your that a lot of workers at Microsoft are in six figures, and that
right,
is probably the male, and that Microsoft has a lot of programmers, and that in itself is a higher paid occupation, and that what is it, 29% of the workforce is female. They need to improve that. They need to improve that percentage in the high paid six figure salary programmer realm. Right. So yeah, they definitely need to do better on their ratio. And I haven't been able to dig in and see exactly what the pay gap is inside Microsoft. It's hard to get at that information. One of the things that we need is to get better reporting from publicly traded companies, or just companies that are big enough to have an impact on the economy, whether they're publicly traded or not. We really need to have better regulation that forces them to be transparent about their pay practices.
right, and there have been attempts to do that, as you well know, but we'll see how those attempts pan out. Legislatively, there have been attempts to try to do that because it is a very, very important issue. One last topic before we go, the topic that just doesn't go away, the NFL. You know, I did a piece called a couple weeks ago called "What's Wrong with the NFL is What's Wrong with America: Sexism, a Culture of Violence," looking the other way at your star employees. Misbehavior, overpaying, the wealth inequality at the NFL, just among NFL employees, direct employees of the NFL, is staggering. They
Mm-hmm.
have a fairly large workforce, and the top five people earn more than half the entire payroll. So out of almost 2,000 people. So because I ran the number, it's
Wow.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
But it goes on and on and on. This week we had a former NFL employee, a former NFL executive, say that there have been hundreds of domestic violence cases like Ray Rice's that were covered up by the NFL. Did you happen to see that story?
I have seen stories like it. I'm not sure I saw exactly that one, but yeah, absolutely. There are stories that women, scores, if not hundreds of women, over the years have approached the HR department at the NFL and said, "I've been attacked by my husband or my boyfriend. I need your help. What can I do?" And that then the stories that I've been hearing is that those women have been told basically to keep quiet. Do not tell anybody. Keep it silent. I mean, it is absolutely a horrific 19th century and 20th century response to domestic violence. Absolutely horrible. And frankly, one of the things that I think is most deeply troubling about what's going on at the NFL is that Roger Goodell has got an internal review going. He's calling it an independent investigation. It is no such thing, by Robert Mueller. And Mueller's only charge is to look into what did Roger Goodell know about the Ray Rice incident and when did he know it. In fact, what the NFL should be doing is a thoroughgoing investigation. And the more I've thought about it, Richard, the more I think we need four big buckets of types of questions being asked. Number one, how many women in the past, pick your number of years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever, how many women have come forward internally to the NFL seeking services, seeking help for domestic violence or rape or sexual assault or stalking? How many have come forward and what were they told? That's the first bucket of questions. The second bucket, how does the NFL treat its women employees, and does that have an impact
Right.
on how it treats women, wives and girlfriends that are abused within the NFL community? Second bucket of questions. What is, because I've seen stories about this too, and it's something that you've written about, what is the relationship between violence in the game itself, and the head injuries and the other kinds of
Mm-hmm.
injuries that occur to the players. What's the relationship between that and violence against wives and girlfriends by the players? And finally, and this is something I think is going to be very important because the NFL has been extremely aggressive at trying to control the story by claiming that, oh, they get it now, and oh, they're going to consult experts on domestic violence. I want to know, what are the gag orders? What are the silencing techniques they're using against all of the people and organizations that they now may be reaching out to, that they say they're going to reach out to and really get their information? I bet you dollars to donuts they are imposing gag orders on all those organizations. I want details about those gag orders.
That's a fantastic list, Terry. And I will just add one to that as we close to make it an even five, which is what is the role of the NFL's security force in communicating with local police forces and DAs? Because there are stories out that they've been doing it. And to what extent have those security forces participate in the suppression of
Mm-hmm.
domestic violence incidents? I'd add that to your list, but that is a terrific. That sounds like a crusade we ought to work together on. But in any case, thanks so much for joining us as always. Terry O'Neill, president of the National Organization for Women. Great points. And thanks again for coming on the show.
It's so great to talk to you as always. Thank you so much.
We will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.